A drug dealer kidnapped a biker's daughter, igniting a firestorm of vengeance. But this was no simple kidnapping. It was a trap designed to destroy an empire from within, forcing a president to choose between his club's brutal code and a love that could save his soul. If you're new here, subscribe and comment your location. Now let's begin. The bone-rattling roar of the Reaper's MC Hogs shattered the serene morning calm of the sleepy suburban street. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated fury, a promise of vengeance made manifest in steel and thunder. Daniel Grim Resnick, his knuckles white on his handlebars, led the pack, a storm of leather and rage. His cut, adorned with the Grim Reaper patch of club president, flapped behind him like a war banner. "Talk to me, Paul." Grim's voice was a low growl, barely audible over the engines. Yet it carried the weight of absolute authority. It sliced through the comms unit in his helmet, sharp and cold. Paul Prophet Jones, his VP and navigator, responded from the bike beside him, his voice tight. "The signal's weak, Grim, fading in and out. They're moving her, but they're sloppy. Left a digital breadcrumb a mile wide, headed for the old industrial district, the dockside warehouses." "Sloppy?" Grim snarled, gunning his engine and weaving through traffic with lethal grace. "Or are they trying to be found? Elena isn't some pawn. She's my daughter. This feels wrong." "It doesn't matter what it feels like," Paul countered, his own fear for his niece lending an edge to his words. "They took her. They touched her. The club is watching. The whole city is watching. We have to respond. We have to be the Reapers." That was the unshakable truth of their world. An attack on one was an attack on all. An attack on the president's blood was an attack on the soul of the club itself. There was a script for this, written in gasoline and blood, and they were expected to follow it. They found the warehouse Paul had tracked them to. It was a perfect, cliché hideout, decrepit, reeking of rust and saltwater, isolated, almost too perfect. Grim gave the signal, a sharp downward chop of his hand. The roar of the engines died, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the creaking of old metal and the distant cry of gulls. 12 of his most trusted men, his inner circle, dismounted in unison, a symphony of controlled violence. They moved like wolves, fanning out, covering angles, their weapons drawn. Grim kicked the rusted side door in, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the vast, empty space. The scene inside was staged. A single chair sat in a pool of grimy light, rope discarded on the floor as if hastily cut. A cheap burner phone lay on the seat, blinking. There was no struggle, no sign of Elena, no bodies. "Clear!" David Joker Chen called out from the shadows, his usual comedic bravado absent. "Nothing back here but rats and regrets." Mark Havoc Jones, the club's sergeant-at-arms and Elena's other uncle, stalked over to the chair, his face a mask of thunder. He picked up the rope, his fingers tracing the clean surgical cut. This wasn't cut in a struggle. This was done with a razor knife. Precise. Paul reached for the burner phone just as it vibrated. He flipped it open. A single text message glowed on the screen from an unknown number. "You burn our stashes. We burn your world. The Sons of Anarchy send their regards." Mark let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "The Sons of Anarchy? Those meth-head posers from the north side? They don't have the stones for this. Their idea of a complex operation is remembering to put pants on." David, trying to lighten the suffocating tension, chimed in as he poked at a dusty crate. "Maybe they got a day planner. Monday, cook meth. Tuesday, launder money. Wednesday, kidnap biker princess. Start a war." Ambitious. But Grim wasn't listening. He was staring at the floor. He knelt, his large, calloused fingers brushing against the concrete. There, almost invisible, was a single small, high-heeled shoe print, and next to it, a partial tread mark from a boot, not the worn-down soles of a low-level tweaker. This was deep, aggressive tread, the kind used by tactical units or professional security. Military grade. His blood ran cold. "This is a setup," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried through the entire warehouse. They weren't sloppy. They were painting a picture, and we're supposed to frame it. Paul looked from the text message to the shoe print, the logic dawning on him. They want us to go to war with the Suns. They're handing us the enemy on a silver platter. And if we take the bait, Mark finished, the grim reality settling in, we wipe out the Suns, but we'll be bleeding, weakened. And whoever really has Elena, they just clear the board of two major players in one move. The weight of the presidency settled on Grimm's shoulders like a lead cloak. His men, his brothers, were looking at him. Their eyes burned with the need for retribution for the simple, clean violence they understood. To tell them to stand down, to think, would be a sign of weakness. It could fracture the club, but to charge blindly forward was to dance in the palm of a hidden, powerful enemy. "We don't play their game," Grimm declared, rising to his full height. His voice was low, but it held a finality that brooked no argument. "But we make them think we are. Mark, you and Joker take the boys. Go make a lot of noise at the Suns clubhouse. Scare the hell out of them, but no bullets. Not yet. I want to hear what they have to say when we're knocking down their door." Mark nodded, a feral grin spreading across his face. "A little psychological warfare. I can do that." "Paul?" Grimm turned to his oldest friend, his voice dropping. "You and I, we're going off the books. We find the real monster in this story." As the rest of the Reapers mounted up, their engines roaring back to life with the promise of sanctioned chaos, Grimm and Paul stood alone in the silent warehouse. The charade was about to begin, but the real war, the silent shadow war for Elena's life, had just started, and Grimm knew, with a chilling certainty, that he was walking into a trap with his eyes wide open, his daughter's life, the prize for his mistake. The world outside the Reapers' fortified clubhouse, a converted auto body shop they called the Chop Shop, was descending into a carefully orchestrated chaos of their own making. Mark and David led a contingent of enforcers to the Sons of Anarchy's dilapidated headquarters, a scene of glorious, thunderous intimidation. They didn't fire a shot, but they made it abundantly clear that the Reapers were a force of nature and the Sons were standing on the wrong beach. Meanwhile, inside the clubhouse, the air was thick with the smell of stale beer, gun oil, and a simmering, helpless anxiety. Grimm stood before a massive corkboard that usually displayed territory maps and shipment schedules. Now, it was a shrine to his failure. A recent smiling photo of Elena, her dark hair a cascade over her shoulders, her laugh lines crinkling around eyes the same shade of stormy gray as his, was pinned dead center. Around it, Grimm was pinning everything else. Grainy CCTV stills from near her apartment, the photo of the boot print, and the rope from the warehouse. The text message from the burner phone. Paul entered holding a laptop, his face grim. "The boys are putting on a show. The Sons are denying everything, of course. They look terrified, not guilty." He set the laptop down on the scarred pool table. "I've been digging into that boot print. The model is a Salomon Quest 4D GTX, favored by, well, by guys who aren't junkies. Special forces, mercenaries, high-end private security." Grimm drove a pushpin into the board with a final, sharp thwack. "So we're not dealing with rivals. We're dealing with professionals and corporation." He turned, his eyes sweeping the room, landing on the woman who was the club's unlikely secret weapon. "Jessica, what can you tell me about the phone?" Jessica, the club's resident tech guru and David's on-again, off-again girlfriend, looked up from her own array of screens. She was a pocket-sized whirlwind of dyed purple hair and sharp intelligence, a stark contrast to the hulking bikers around her. The signal was bounced through 3 different servers, 2 in Eastern Europe, 1 in Mexico. "It's a ghost trail, Daniel, a really, really expensive one. This isn't some local crew. This is cartel-level misdirection." The word hung in the air, toxic and heavy. Cartel. It was a different league. The Reapers were kings of their city, but the cartels were empires. Just then, the clubhouse door burst open and Mark strode in, followed by David, who was dusting off his leather vest. "Well, that was a bust," Mark grumbled, grabbing a beer from the fridge and draining half of it in one go. "The Sons are clueless. Their president, some guy named Ratchet, was practically pissing his pants. He swore on his mother's grave they had nothing to do with it. Offered to help." David, ever the comedian, added, "I believe him. The guy's mother's grave is probably a used oil drum, but the fear was real." "So, we have nothing," Grimm said, the frustration a live wire in his voice. He ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "A ghost, a boot print, and a trail leading to Mexico." "Not nothing," a soft, melodic voice said from the doorway. All eyes turned. It was Stella. She moved with a quiet grace that always seemed to calm the storm inside the clubhouse. Her relationship with Grimm was the club's worst-kept secret, a fragile, beautiful thing built in the shadows of their violent world. She was holding a small, elegant handbag, her face pale but composed. "Stella," Grimm said, his voice softening infinitesimally, "you shouldn't be here." "Where else would I be?" she replied, her gaze steady on him. She walked to the board, her eyes lingering on Elena's photo. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but her voice didn't waver. "Elena, she came to see me yesterday. She was nervous. She said she'd overheard something at the bar she works at. Men talking in Spanish. Not the usual kitchen staff. Well-dressed. She heard the name Cerberus." Paul frowned. "Cerberus? The three-headed dog? What does that mean?" "It's not a what. It's a who," Jessica interjected, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "Or in operation. I've seen whispers in encrypted chat rooms. Operación Cerbero. It's a cleanup operation, ruthless, efficient, tied to the Sombra Negra cartel. They move into a city and tidy up, eliminate the competition." The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying final clarity. The Sombra Negra cartel wasn't just trying to start a war, they were using the Reapers as their unwitting exterminators. They would take out the Sons, and in the ensuing bloodbath, they would move in and pick off the weakened Reapers. A perfect, brutal corporate strategy. Grimm's phone buzzed. An unknown number. He put it on speaker, his heart a hammer in his chest. A digitally distorted voice filled the room, cold and devoid of humanity. "Resnick, you are deviating from the script. The Sons of Anarchy must burn. Your daughter's continued breathing depends on your adherence to the narrative. You have 24 hours to deliver their president's head, or we will start mailing you pieces of Elena." The line went dead. The room was tomb silent. The threat was visceral, a blade held to the throat of everyone Grimm loved. David broke the silence, his attempt at humor a fragile shield. "Well, on the bright side, they have a flair for the dramatic. Start mailing you pieces. A little cliche, don't you think?" Stella moved to Grimm's side, her hand finding his. Her touch was a brand, a reminder of what was at stake, of the life they were trying to build away from the violence. He looked down at their joined hands, then at the faces of his brothers. Paul's steady loyalty, Mark's fiery protectiveness, David's unwavering spirit, Jessica's brilliant mind, and Stella, his anchor in the coming storm. He had an empire to protect, a daughter to save, and a hidden enemy to destroy. And he had 24 hours. "They want a war," Grimm said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that promised a storm. "They'll get one, but not the one they're expecting. We find their staging ground. We find their weakness." He looked at Elena's photo, his love for her a physical pain in his chest. "We find my daughter." The next 12 hours were a blur of controlled, silent frenzy. The public face of the Reapers was one of escalating aggression toward the Sons of Anarchy. A brilliant performance orchestrated by Mark. But the real work happened in the shadows. Jessica, fueled by coffee and a cold fury, became a digital bloodhound. The name Cerberus was her key. She tracked financial ghosts, shell corporations, and property purchases that didn't make sense. She found a pattern, a series of warehouses on the far south side of the city, all purchased in the last 6 months through a labyrinth of holding companies, all ultimately traceable to a single shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, a corporation named Cerberus Holdings. "It's a network," she announced, her eyes red-rimmed but blazing with triumph. "They're not in one place. They've got a primary location. Here, this old meatpacking plant. It's huge, isolated, and it's got its own power grid. The others are smaller, probably arsenals or safe houses." Paul, using his network of underworld contacts, cross-referenced Jessica's findings. The whispers confirmed it. Men with hard eyes and military bearing had been seen in the area. No loud parties, no flashy cars, just quiet, professional movement. While they worked, the chemistry between Grimm and Stella simmered, a quiet counterpoint to the raging tension. He found her in the kitchen, mechanically making a pot of coffee she wouldn't drink. "You should get some rest," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion and emotion. She turned, her eyes searching his. "I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see her." She reached out, her hand resting against the rough leather of his cut, right over his heart. "We're going to get her back, Daniel. You have to believe that." He covered her hand with his own, his thumb stroking her knuckles. It was a simple gesture, but in their world, it was a profound declaration. In that touch was all the words they never said aloud. The fear, the love, the desperate hope for a future that didn't end in bloodshed. He leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers, drawing strength from her quiet resilience. The world outside was falling apart, but in this small, stolen moment, there was a fortress. It was David, of all people, who provided the final, crucial break. Disguised as a city utilities worker, he'd done a slow, casual drive-by of the meatpacking plant. "The place is a fortress," he reported back, uncharacteristically serious. "Cameras everywhere, motion sensors on the fence, but they made one mistake. They get their food delivered, a gourmet grocery truck, lobster tails, and imported beer. These guys aren't roughing it. And the delivery is scheduled for 5 a.m. tomorrow." A plan, desperate and audacious, began to take shape. They would hit the plant at dawn using the grocery truck as their Trojan horse. But they needed a distraction, something to pull the bulk of the cartel's forces away from the main building. Mark grinned, a predator seeing his opening. "Leave the distraction to me and the boys. We'll give the Sons of Anarchy the war everyone expects us to. A big, loud, beautiful war, right on their doorstep. It'll be on the news. Cerberus will have to be watching." It was a gamble of monumental proportions. They were splitting their forces, pitting a small, elite team against a cartel stronghold, while the rest of the club fought a fake war miles away. The margin for error was zero. As the final preparations were made, as weapons were cleaned and plans were etched into their minds, Grim pulled Paul aside in the garage. "If this goes wrong," Grim started, his voice thick. "It won't," Paul interrupted, his hand on Grim's shoulder. "She's my niece too, brother. We're bringing her home." Grim looked at his friend, the man who had stood by him through 2 decades of blood and brotherhood. "When we get her back, things have to change, Paul. This life, it's cost us too much." Paul nodded slowly, a deep understanding passing between them. The Empire was their legacy, but it was also their cage. Elena's kidnapping was the key, and they were only just realizing they had to decide whether to lock the door behind them forever or throw away the key. The night was endless. Grim didn't sleep. He sat in the silence of the clubhouse, staring at Elena's photo, Stella asleep fitfully on the couch nearby, her hand curled loosely in his. He traced the lines of his daughter's face, remembering the little girl who used to fall asleep on his chest, the weight of her a perfect, precious burden. He remembered teaching her to ride a bicycle, the fierce concentration on her face, the triumphant laugh when she finally found her balance. He remembered the first time she'd looked at his cut with fear instead of pride. Each memory was a shard of glass in his heart. This was the true cost of the Empire. Not the money, not the territory. It was the fear in your daughter's eyes, the target on her back, the sleepless nights wondering if the price of your throne was the soul of your child. The first hint of dawn painted the sky a bruised purple when Mark and his team rumbled out of the compound, their engines a purposeful roar heading north towards the suns. The performance was beginning. An hour later, Grim, Paul, David, and 2 of their most stealthy prospects were crouched in the back of a refrigerated truck. The smell of cilantro and expensive cheese assaulting their senses. They were dressed in stolen delivery uniforms, their weapons hidden beneath white coats. The real delivery drivers were tied up in a storage locker a mile away, very confused and slightly richer for their trouble. The truck slowed, then stopped at the plant's security gate. Grim's heart was a drum against his ribs. He could hear the muffled exchange between the driver, a Reaper prospect named Leo, and the guard. "Delivery for Cerberus Holdings," Leo said, his voice impressively bored. A pause. Grim held his breath. This was the first gate. "Scan your manifest," the guard's voice came through, laced with a subtle Spanish accent. The electronic beep of a barcode scanner. Then a longer pause. Too long. Grim's fingers tightened around the concealed pistol under his coat. He exchanged a look with Paul. This was it. Suddenly, from the north, the distant but unmistakable sound of sirens began to wail, growing into a chorus. Mark's distraction was right on time. The guard outside cursed in Spanish. "Andale, hurry up! Just go through," he barked, the urgency in his voice clear. The gate buzzed and began to swing open. The truck lurched forward, moving into the belly of the beast. They were in. The truck rumbled through the compound, its tires crunching on the gravel. From their hiding spot, Grim and his team could feel the change in the air. A shift from tense anticipation to the electric buzz of a hornet's nest stirred. Shouted orders in Spanish echoed outside, and the sound of boots pounding on concrete indicated men running towards the perimeter, drawn by the symphony of sirens and the distant fictional war Mark was orchestrating. The truck jerked to a final stop. The back doors swung open, flooding the dark, cold space with the harsh, industrial light of a loading bay. "Rapido, rapido, unload and go!" A voice snapped. Grim was the first to move. hopping down with a clipboard in hand, his head bowed, the brim of a stolen cap shadowing his face. Paul and David followed, pulling a hand cart loaded with boxes. The two prospects brought up the rear. The loading bay was vast, but it was far from empty. Two cartel soldiers armed with compact assault rifles stood watch. Their eyes, however, were constantly flicking towards the open bay doors, drawn to the distant commotion. They were professionals, but even professionals get distracted. Grimm scanned the area, his gaze taking in everything. A set of double doors led deeper into the plant. A metal staircase on the left led to a catwalk and an office overlooking the bay. That was the likely command center. One of the soldiers, a man with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, gestured impatiently at the boxes. "Just leave it there. Your payment is already processed. Now get out." This was the critical moment. They couldn't just leave. They had to get deeper inside. Grimm nodded, his voice a low, serviceable mumble. "Gotta get a signature. Company policy." He took a step towards the soldier, the clipboard held out like a shield. The soldier's eyes narrowed, his focus finally locking onto Grimm. He looked at the clipboard, then back at Grimm's face, at the hard lines around his eyes that no delivery uniform could soften. The soldier's hand tightened on his rifle. It was David who saved the moment. He stumbled, letting a box of overripe mangoes tumble from the handcart. The fruit exploded on the concrete floor in a messy, sticky, and incredibly distracting splash of yellow and orange. "Idiota!" the other soldier barked, stepping back in disgust. Scarface's attention snapped away from Grimm for a split second, just long enough. Grimm's hand, which had been reaching for the clipboard, now held a sleek, silenced pistol. There was a soft thud, and the soldier with the scar crumpled without a sound. Paul moved in the same fluid motion, a combat knife appearing in his hand as he closed the distance to the second guard. His arm wrapping around the man's neck and the blade finding its mark. It was over in 2 heartbeats. They dragged the bodies behind the truck. The air in the bay was now thick with the cloying sweetness of mangoes and the coppery tang of blood. "No alarms," Paul whispered, wiping his blade. "They're all looking the other way." Grimm pointed towards the double doors. "David, you and the kids secure this exit. Hold it. No one gets in or out. Paul, with me." David gave a sharp nod, his usual humor gone, replaced by the deadly serious competence that lay beneath. He and the two prospects took up defensive positions, their weapons trained on the bay entrance. Grimm and Paul moved to the double doors. Grimm pressed his ear against the cold metal, hearing nothing. He tried the handle. Locked. Paul produced a small set of lockpicks, his hands steady as a surgeon's. 30 seconds later, there was a soft click. Grimm slowly pushed the door open a crack. The sight that greeted them was a stark contrast to the grimy loading bay. They were looking into a long, sterile corridor lit by bright fluorescent lights. The walls were white, the floor a clean gray epoxy. It looked more like a hospital or a lab than a meat packing plant. The air smelled of antiseptic and ozone. They slipped inside, moving like ghosts. The first door on the right was ajar. Grimm peered in. It was an armory, racks of high-end weaponry, FN SCARs, H&K MP5s, enough firepower to start a small revolution. This confirmed everything. Further down the hall, they heard voices, a low, calm conversation in Spanish, coming from behind a closed door marked Control. Grimm recognized one of the voices. It was the same digitally distorted one from the phone call, now in its natural, chillingly human state. "The Reapers are fully engaged. The police scanners are going wild. It's a perfect containment." The voice was smooth, educated. "Good. Keep monitoring. Once their numbers are sufficiently depleted, we move phase 2. Eliminate the Reaper leadership. The city will be ours for the taking." A second voice, deeper, more authoritative. Grimm's blood ran cold. Phase 2. They weren't just after territory. They were planning a decapitation strike. He and his officers were already in the crosshairs. He gestured to Paul and they moved past the control room. Elena had to be the priority. They checked room after room, a barracks with neat military-style bunks, a communications hub, a kitchen. No Elena. At the end of the hall was another heavy door, this one with a keypad entry. A solitary guard stood outside, looking bored. This was it. It had to be. There was no time for finesse. Grimm stepped into the open. The guard's eyes widened, and he started to bring his weapon up. Paul was faster. 2 silenced shots from his own pistol punched into the man's chest. He slid down the wall, leaving a dark smear on the pristine white paint. Grimm rushed to the door. It was locked solid. He pounded on it, his voice a raw, desperate whisper. Elena! Elena, are you in there?" A moment of terrifying silence. Then, a faint, trembling voice from the other side. "Dad?" The sound of his daughter's voice, laced with fear but alive, was like a lightning strike to his soul. A wave of relief so powerful it made him dizzy washed over him. "Stand back, baby, stand back," he ordered. He and Paul aimed their pistols at the keypad and the locking mechanism, firing repeatedly. Sparks flew, and metal shrieked. With a final, powerful kick from Grimm, the door burst inward. The room was small, windowless, and bare except for a cot and a bucket. And there she was. Elena, huddled in the corner, her face pale and streaked with tears, her clothes torn. But her eyes, those stormy gray eyes that were his own, blazed with a mixture of terror and defiant hope. "Dad!" she sobbed, scrambling to her feet and launching herself into his arms. He caught her, holding her tighter than he ever had, burying his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of her, a scent he thought he might never smell again. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated emotion, a fissure in the hard shell of the mafia president. "I've got you, Malishka, I've got you. You're safe," he murmured, the Russian endearment from his childhood slipping out. Paul stood guard at the door, his own eyes glistening, giving them this fleeting moment. The reunion was shattered by the blaring scream of an alarm. Red lights began to strobe in the hallway. Their entry had finally been detected. "Time to go!" Paul yelled, firing a burst down the corridor towards the control room. Grimm pushed Elena behind him, his pistol up. "Stay behind me, no matter what." They moved back down the hall, a tight, desperate unit. The door to the control room flew open, and a cartel soldier emerged, his rifle coming up. Grimm fired twice, and the man fell back. But more were coming. The sound of running footsteps was everywhere. They burst back into the loading bay. David and the prospects were pinned down behind the truck, trading fire with several cartel soldiers who had come in from the compound. "We're outnumbered," David shouted over the gunfire. "They've sealed the gate. They were trapped." The distraction had worked too well. It had pulled the guards inside the compound back to their posts. They were in a kill box. Grimm looked around wildly, his mind racing. The armory. They needed equalizers. "Paul, cover us! Elena, with me!" He grabbed Elena's hand and sprinted back towards the double doors, firing wildly to keep the cartel soldiers' heads down. Paul and David laid down a suppressing barrage, the deafening roar of unsilenced gunfire now filling the vast space. They reached the armory. Grimm kicked the door open and stared at the arsenal. His eyes landed on a pair of M32 rotary grenade launchers. "David," he yelled, "think you can make an entrance?" A wild, almost joyous grin spread across David's face. "Is the Pope Catholic?" Grimm tossed him one of the heavy launchers. David caught it, his fingers expertly finding the grip. He stepped out from behind cover, hefting the weapon onto his shoulder. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the stunned cartel soldiers. "Check, please." He fired. The 40mm high explosive round shot across the bay and detonated against the main rolling door. The concussion was massive, shaking the very foundations of the building. The metal door tore like paper, revealing a gaping hole to the outside world and the gray dawn light. "Go, go, go!" Grimm roared. They ran, a storm of leather and fire, bursting through the smoke and debris of the ruined door. The compound outside was chaos. The remaining cartel soldiers, disoriented by the explosion, were easy targets for Paul and the prospects, who picked them off with precise, ruthless efficiency. A black SUV came skidding around the corner, its windows down, muzzles flashing. The deep-voiced man from the control room was hanging out of the passenger window, an assault rifle in his hands. "Get to the truck!" Grimm shoved Elena towards their stolen delivery vehicle. Bullets sparked off the concrete around them. One round caught Paul in the shoulder, spinning him around with a grunt of pain. "Paul!" Elena screamed. "I'm fine. Keep moving." He gritted out, clutching his bleeding shoulder, but keeping his weapon up. Grimm stopped, turned, and raised his pistol. It was an impossible shot, a moving target in the chaos with his daughter's safety on the line. But in that moment, time seemed to slow. He was no longer just Daniel Resnick, president of the Reapers. He was a father, a protector, the empire, the club, the war. It all faded away. There was only this target, this threat to his family. He exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. Once, twice. The first shot spiderwebbed the SUV's windshield. The second found its mark, hitting the gunman in the throat. The man's rifle clattered to the ground, and he disappeared back inside the vehicle, which swerved violently and crashed into a stack of shipping containers. They reached the truck. David was already in the driver's seat, the engine roaring. They piled in: Grim, Elena, a bleeding Paul, and the two prospects. David didn't wait for doors to close. He slammed the truck into gear and aimed for the shattered remains of the main gate, plowing through the twisted metal and out onto the open road, leaving the inferno of the Cerberus base behind them. In the bouncing, frantic cab, Elena clung to her father, sobbing into his chest. He held her, his hand cradling the back of her head, his own body trembling with the aftershock of adrenaline and overwhelming relief. He looked over at Paul, who was applying pressure to his wound, his face pale but his jaw set. They had done it. Against impossible odds, they had pulled her from the belly of the beast. But as the city skyline came into view, Grim knew it wasn't over. The Sombra Negra cartel had been humiliated. Their plan was in ruins. They would not take this lying down. The real war for the soul of the city was just beginning. And as he looked down at his daughter, safe in his arms, he knew the choices he would have to make would redefine not just his empire, but his very soul. The truck didn't stop until it reached the safe house, a nondescript suburban home owned by a retired Reaper who asked no questions. The moment the engine cut, the adrenaline bled away, leaving a bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. The front door flew open and Stella stood there, her hands flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with a desperate hope. When she saw Elena, alive and stumbling out of the truck, a raw, guttural cry escaped her. She rushed forward, wrapping the girl in an embrace so fierce it seemed to defy the very laws of physics. They sank to their knees on the damp lawn, a tangle of limbs and muffled sobs. Stella rocked her, whispering, "My girl, my sweet girl," over and over, like a prayer. Grim stood back, watching them. The sight of them together, safe, was a balm on the raw, burning anger that had been fueling him. Paul, his shoulder now crudely bandaged, clapped a hand on his good arm, a silent gesture of shared victory and pain, before heading inside to get his wound properly seen to. David leaned against the truck, lighting a cigarette with a trembling hand. Well, he exhaled a plume of smoke, the usual bravado absent, replaced by a hollowed-out sincerity. That was a Tuesday. Later, after Elena had been checked over, fed, and had fallen into a fitful sleep in a back bedroom with Stella watching over her, the men gathered in the living room. The mood was grim. They had won the battle. But the cost was laid bare in Paul's bandaged shoulder and the haunted look in everyone's eyes. "They'll come for us now," Mark stated, his voice a low rumble. He was back from his theatrical war with the Suns, which had ended the moment the cartel's alarm had blared. Not with tricks. With everything they have. We blew up their base and shot their commander. This is an act of war. "It was always a war," Grim said, his voice quiet, but cutting through the room. He was staring out of the window into the dark street. "We just didn't know we were fighting it." He turned to face them, his expression etched with a new, terrible resolve. "We hit them first. We hit them where it hurts." Jessica, who had been typing furiously on her laptop, looked up. "I might have a way. The Shell Corporation, Cerberus Holdings. Its signatory. The man who authorized the purchases for the meatpacking plant and the other safe houses. His name is Arturo Vega. He's not a soldier. He's the cartel's lawyer. Their money man. He's based in a penthouse downtown. Thinks he's insulated. Thinks he's clean. A lawyer, a money man, not a hardened soldier, but the engine of the empire." Grim's lips curled into a cold, thin smile. "Then we don't send soldiers. We send a message." The following night, Arturo Vega was enjoying a glass of expensive añejo tequila, looking out over the glittering skyline from his pristine penthouse. The news was on, showing the aftermath of the violent biker gang war that had erupted. Everything was going according to plan, a minor setback at the plant notwithstanding. The Reapers were beasts, predictable and easily manipulated. He didn't hear the door to his study open. The first he knew of the intrusion was the soft click of the door closing. He turned, and his blood froze. Daniel Grim Resnick stood there, still wearing the same leather cut, smelling of gunpowder, sweat, and the cold night air. He hadn't come through the front door. He'd come up the service elevator, bypassing the state-of-the-art security with a simplicity that was terrifying. "Arturo Vega," Grim said, his voice a conversational calm that was more frightening than any shout. We need to talk about your client's hostile takeover bid. Vega sputtered, reaching for his phone. Grimm didn't move. Go ahead. Call them. Tell them I'm here. It will save me the trouble of tracking them down. But first, Grimm took a slow step forward. You're going to transfer every dollar the Sombra Negra cartel has in its operational accounts to a numbered one I provide. You're going to sign over the deeds to every property they own in this city. And you're going to give me the name and location of the man who gives you your orders. You're insane, Vega whispered, his face ashen. They will skin you alive. They will kill your entire family. Grimm was in front of him now, so close Vega could see the flecks of gold in his stormy gray eyes, could smell the violence on him. He placed his hands on the arms of Vega's expensive leather chair, caging him in. You misunderstand the situation, Grimm said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. I am not here to negotiate. I am not here to threaten. I am here to deliver a verdict. You targeted my daughter. You threatened my family. You don't get to hide behind money and lawyers anymore. You are in my world now. And in my world, when you take a king's daughter, you don't just start a war. You forfeit your entire kingdom. The sheer, unadulterated certainty in Grimm's voice broke Vega. This wasn't a businessman. This was a force of nature. He was looking into the eyes of a man who had already accepted the possibility of his own death and had found it a price he was willing to pay. Trembling, Vega complied. For an hour, under Grimm's unblinking gaze, he typed, signed, and transmitted. Millions of dollars vanished from cartel accounts. Properties changed hands. And finally, he scribbled a name and an address on a piece of paper. El Silencio, a coastal estate 2 hours north, the cartel's regional boss. Grimm took the paper, folded it, and placed it in his pocket. He looked at the broken man in the chair. If any of this is a trap, if a single hair on my daughter's head is harmed, I will not kill you. I will find everyone you have ever loved, and I will make you watch. Do you believe me? Vega could only nod, tears of shame and fear streaking his face. Grimm turned and walked out as silently as he had arrived, leaving the taste of ashes and defeat in the air. Back at the safe house, the mood was different. They had the money. They had the properties. They had the name. They had the cartel by the throat. A fierce, triumphant energy filled the room. Mark was already planning the assault on El Silencio's estate. It was time for the final crushing blow, but Grimm stood apart from the celebration. He watched them, his brothers, his family. He watched Stella gently brushing Elena's hair, the girl flinching at a sudden noise from the kitchen. He saw the shadow that wouldn't leave her eyes. The Empire was saved, stronger than ever. They had won. So why did it feel like such a profound loss? He walked out onto the back porch, the cool night air a shock to his system. Stella followed him a moment later, standing beside him, her presence a quiet comfort. You're not going to lead the attack, are you? She asked softly, already knowing the answer. He shook his head, his eyes on the distant lights of the city he had ruled for so long. This life, it's a ghost that feeds on your soul, Stella. It took my wife. It almost took my daughter. I won't let it take the rest of me. I won't let it take us. He turned to her, taking her hands in his. They were rough, a working man's hands, but his touch was gentle. I built an empire out of blood and loyalty, but an empire is a cold thing to leave your children. I'm ending it. Tonight. The charged chemistry between them, the love that had been a secret refuge, now bloomed openly in the space between their bodies. He cupped her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. I'm stepping down. Paul will take over. He'll be a better president than I ever was. He knows the old way is done. Tears welled in Stella's eyes, not of sadness, but of a hope she had long since buried. What will we do? We'll live, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He leaned in, and his lips met hers. It was not a kiss of passion, but of promise. A seal on a new covenant, a vow for a future untethered from the violence of the past. It was an 18-plus moment of profound intimacy, a connection of souls that was more powerful than any physical act. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. We'll live. Inside, he gathered his men. He stood before Paul, Mark, David, and the others. He took off his cut, the heavy leather vest with the president's patch, the symbol of his power, his identity for 2 decades. He held it out to Paul. The club is yours, brother, Grimm said, his voice strong and clear. The war with the cartel is over. You have their money, their assets. Negotiate a peace from a position of strength. But the old way, the way of endless retaliation, it ends with me. There was a stunned silence. Mark looked like he'd been punched. David's usual smile was gone, replaced by a look of deep respect. Paul stared at the cut in Grimm's hands as if it were a holy relic. "Daniel," Paul began. His voice choked. "It's time," Grimm said, a weight lifting from his shoulders with the words, "I have to be a father now, not a king." He pressed the cut into Paul's hands. The transfer of power was complete. It was not met with cheers, but with a solemn, understanding silence. They were reapers, and they understood the price of the crown better than anyone. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, Daniel Resnick walked out of the safe house. He held the hands of the two women who were his entire world, Elena, who was still fragile but safe, and Stella, who was his future. He didn't look back at the empire he had built and then walked away from. He didn't need to. He had won the war not by destroying his enemy, but by choosing to save himself. He got into a car with them, an ordinary car, and drove away from the life of a mafia king toward the simple, extraordinary life of a free man. The bikers had done what they had to do, and in the end, their president had done what he had to do, not for his empire, but for his soul. Thank you for watching. This just goes to show you should never underestimate the fury of a father and his brothers. But what would you have done in their situation? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more intense stories like this.